still coming in, but we can definitely get started. I just want to start off by saying hello to all of our panelists, as well as all of our attendees who are coming in tonight to hear this panel and this presentation and be a part of this conversation. That's really what we want. We're gonna facilitate a dialogue, but we also want you to join in with your questions. So I encourage you at any point to please put your questions in the Q&A box, and I'll be referencing them throughout the panel. So any question you have, feel free to pop it in there, and we will facilitate those. So tonight is the NYU diversity discussion, and we're talking specifically about queer journalists and how they are navigating the newsroom. And I know I'm not the first person that will say this, and I'm not certainly the last in the next month and a half that we have left in 2020, but 2020 has been a year. I know for all of us in the newsroom, back in January, we had an election on the horizon coming up in November. We were just getting news alerts about a virus that was spreading overseas. But I don't think many of us back in January knew about the year that we were going to have in store for us. So here we are, middle of November, and 2021 right around the corner. But the thing that I really thought about reflecting on ahead of tonight was this idea that 2020 is a year that we lived, not a year that we skip. And so I sort of want to keep on revisiting that theme as we hit all of our talking points that I want to get to tonight. We're going to be discussing the newsroom in 2020, the changes that we've seen this year, our look forward for what it means for queer and LGBT journalists in newsrooms, how queer and LGBT journalists are facilitating safe spaces for the elevation of stories from queer and LGBT individuals. I really want to make sure that we discuss the work that we're doing, leaders in the space, and how we're capitalizing on the different mediums and the verticals we have represented here. We have freelancers, we have editors, we have reporters, and so we have the opportunity tonight to hear what's actually happening on the ground, and hopefully to inspire some young journalists who may be tuning in tonight to hear from this panel as part of the NYU initiative. So, we want to talk about how to balance your own personal identity, perhaps as an LGBTQ person, when you're covering these stories and making these pitches. And of course, it is not by chance that we planned this event to take place during Trans Awareness Week, where we do recognize our transgender and gender nonconforming members of the LGBTQ community. And of course, tomorrow being Trans Remembrance Day, where we will, we're in a year where we've seen the most reported acts of violence against the transgender community. And I do specify reported because there may be more, but so often they go unreported. So those being majority Black and brown individuals as well. So we'll have a lot to discuss tonight. But again, I remind you that this was a year that we lived and not one to skip. So without further ado, I really want to take the pleasure of introducing our panel members. I'm going to reference my notes because these are fantastic humans with fantastic bios. And I want to make sure that everyone is introduced appropriately. So just to begin with myself, I am an NYU journalism alum. My name is Brandon Gomez. I'm currently a producer at CNBC. I actually made a career switch about 4 years ago from higher ed. I was a college admissions recruiter, and then quickly transitioned into a career in journalism. Got my start actually at NBC with the Weekend Today show. Did a quick, very quick brief stint in local news at New York One on the education beat, and then found my way back to the NBC family where I am now at CNBC. That's the very brief version for myself. We also have joining us Meredith Bennett Smith. She is also an NYU journalism alum, founder and editor of Think, which is NBC News's home for fresh opinion, sharp analysis, and powerful essays. Before NBC, she was at Quartz, and prior to Quartz, Meredith was the identities editor at Mic.com, where she spearheaded the site's coverage of race, gender, and LGBTQ issues. Meredith, thank you for joining us. And also joining us, we have Travell Anderson. Travell is an award-winning journalist, social curator, and world changer who, and I quote, always comes to slay. They were named the Roots 2020 list of the 100 most influential African Americans. The former director of culture and entertainment at Out Magazine, and has dedicated their career to centering those in the margins, gray spaces, and at the intersection of life through a pop culture lens. Prior to working at Out, they worked at the LA Times, covering Hollywood's red carpet events. Thank you, Travell, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. Dawn Ennis, I got that correct. Dawn Ennis is the managing editor at outsports.com. And in 2013 was the first transgender journalist to come out in network news. In addition to being an award-winning journalist, she hosts the Rise Up with Dawn Ennis talk show, co-hosts the Transporter Room podcast, and is a television correspondent for Connecticut Voice Out Loud on WTNH. She also teaches journalism, advertising, and public relations at the University of Hartford. Thank you, Dawn.
Glad to be here.
And last but certainly not least, David Artavia. Did I pronounce that correct? I didn't do a pre-screening.
Artavia, it's fine.
Artavia. So,
you can call me whatever you want, just call me.
Well said. David became the editor-in-chief at Out Magazine in 2020. Very recently, actually, just in the last few months, correct? He was previously co-editor-in-chief of The Advocate magazine, prior to which he was managing director of The Advocate and Plus magazine, formerly editor of Chill magazine and HollywoodHoller.com, head writer for GayGuys.com and the gay blog Hayety.co. David was named one of Folio magazine's 2019 Rising Stars. Thank you, David, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, of course. And last but not least, our audience. We really appreciate you for being here tonight. There's a lot of Zoom fatigue in 2020, and you're choosing to be with us. So we really thank you for being here and spending just an hour of your time with us to hear from these fantastic journalists on an issue that not only matters to us, but really matters to a lot of people in this community, and is something that we will really look at tonight. And with that, I again encourage you to look at the Q&A feature, ask questions. Now is an opportunity. We've pulled some time for these 4 amazing journalists here, so take advantage of it. To start, the title of the panel is Queer in the Newsroom, right? So it's about being a queer LGBT journalist in the newsroom. And so it got me thinking, what exactly is the newsroom? We've seen a lot of change in our newsroom here at CNBC over the last few months. And I know as journalists, we're all very passionate storytellers. We operate, as I said, in different mediums. There isn't necessarily one clean-cut space anymore for what is a newsroom, right? Like it's not an episode of Aaron Sorkin and Jeff Daniels on HBO doing the newsroom. It's beyond that. And so I want to tackle that with each of you individually first, and I then want to open it up for us to have a broader conversation. So, David, I do want to start with you because you're a few months into your new role as editor-in-chief at Out Magazine. Can you talk to us a little bit about your transition to that role, working in the newsroom? And I think it's a unique position that you're operating in a newsroom that does specifically speak to the LGBTQ community, and has stories that individuals are coming to you for that are from the LGBTQ community. So can you talk to us a little bit about what the newsroom means at Out Magazine?
Yeah, so I did just start the position a couple months ago. I joined an incredibly talented team. Mike Street, who's our digital director, is an incredible leader, and he knows the audience like the back of his hand. We have Meredith, who is a trans lesbian staff writer, and we have Javi Rodriguez, who works in social media. And this is an incredible, diverse, wonderful, hardworking group of people. And working in the queer space, you have a sort of double responsibility on your shoulders, right? It's like you're not just a journalist who happens to be LGBTQ. You're an LGBTQ journalist. So it's just a different role. We have to hold certain people accountable in a way that you might not if you're working at a mainstream news outlet or something like that. So the Newsroom, after COVID, I have to say, has been just as fast-paced, even though we're all virtual now. You know, we were in New York and LA, and now we're in Virginia, we're in Chicago, we're in Austin, we're in New Orleans, we're in Brooklyn, we're all over the place. But you know, with a brand like Out specifically, where our audience finds us, you know, they specifically search for us, rather than being a sort of like part of the hamburger menu on a larger mainstream outlet that's just a sort of gay subcategory or whatever, that a lot of outlets do. You know, we have a huge role to play in the trajectory of where our culture is going, just as queer journalists. And you know, it's been a journey since taking on this position in a great way, because I am starting to really understand recently the power of the pen in a way that I haven't had before. I was managing editor of The Advocate for 5 years before, but now stepping into this leadership position, it's kind of been an amazing, eye-opening opportunity for me, especially given the year that we had, to speak directly to the LGBTQ reader in a way that other outlets don't. So it's ever changing, and it's been rewarding, but also you have to be open to changes, you know. So it's been very, very rewarding, to say the least.
Yeah, I what really resonates, right, is when you talk about taking on that charge, because people are turning to you for these stories, and the power of the pen. And I think about that when I think about Out, you know, and Out's publications, as a space where people are turning to for these stories. And so that's actually where I would then pivot, just to Meredith. I'm curious, for you, right? You manage and you oversee a platform that includes these stories, right? You include LGBTQ stories, but it's maybe part of one of the verticals of Think. So I'm wondering if you can perhaps speak to a platform that, you know, as I said, includes LGBTQ narratives, but isn't necessarily centered around them in the way that Out Magazine is. You know, how does that newsroom experience still facilitate these conversations?
Yeah, you know, NBC News, so Think is the opinion section for NBC News. And I also oversee, actually, it just started, so it doesn't matter, the opinion section for MSNBC. And within that, so NBC News also has its own dedicated LGBTQ section, which is called Out, which is fabulous. Brooks Apelsa runs that. But what we do, what we try and do with Think is that the mission of Think is to elevate all types of voices, right? The whole point of an op-ed section is to elevate perspectives that, for whatever reason, are not being highlighted on the news side. And we very much want to complement what's going on the news side. And LGBT coverage, so what we're doing with our LGBT coverage is like really finding ways to, even though it's in the mainstream, to push those voices to an audience that, unlike perhaps without, isn't seeking out that content. So that is a different type of mandate, but I think it is also an important one. Our audience is super broad, and they're not coming to Think necessarily for LGBTQ content, but we're going to give it to them. And I think that when we're doing that, we're thinking, I take that very seriously, but it's kind of like we want to make sure that those voices are in spaces that maybe are not even considered particularly friendly to gay audiences, because that's part of expanding the reach of not just LGBTQ media and perspectives, but just trying to make it everywhere, right? Like, we don't want we want people to have a safe space, and we want to have, I mean, gay journalism organizations are fabulous and so important. And we also, though, want people to, who are not looking for that content, to see it anyways. So that's what I'm thinking about for Think, especially making sure that we're not just saying like, well, we have out, so that's enough. We're saying like, actually, we want to make sure that that diversity of thought and diversity of writer is carried through as much as possible across the entire NBC News organization.
Yeah, and that's where someone may see a piece on, you know, Think, and then it sends them down that Googleverse rabbit hole that brings them to an article on Out. And I think about that, and being in the NBC family, you know, we've also had those conversations, right? There can be a story that is on the cover of the NBC Out vertical, but what if that story on the cover of NBC Out was on the cover of NBCnews.com? And that it was disseminated to the broader audience, in addition to those who were seeking out that story, right? It's this conversation of those who are attending the event, you know, maybe they're the choir, and there's a reason why the expression exists of preaching to the choir, but you can then broaden that out and bring new people into the fold that may not have been there before. So I do love the idea that in a way, Meredith, you and David are facilitating dialogue between your two verticals.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we want it to be. We just want it to be very complimentary. And Brooks and the content of Out absolutely does make it onto the NBC News cover. So when you go to NBCnews.com, you'll see an Out story, you'll see a Think story, and you may not even know this is when you're looking at it that it's on the homepage where it's from. But I do think that for a variety of reasons and through various distribution channels, Think has a secondary opportunity to just build on the fabulous stuff that Out is doing. And that also extends not just to the topics that we're covering, but to who's writing them, right? And trying to make sure that we have diversity in our writers, even when they're not writing about LGBTQ topics, which is something that's important.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah, Meredith, you've done an incredible job. I just want to say you're doing. I think is incredible, because it really does. It's so important. It reminds us all that, you know, we're not a monolith, right? We're more than an acronym. We each have very specific, unique experiences, and all of them are important. And all of them need to be expressed and told in a way that you know, in years past, other mainstream outlets would just say, "Oh, we got that covered. We got the LGBTQ plus you know, focus covered." But it's great to see outlets like Think, because it's so needed. So I just wanted to chime that in.
Please. I was going to say, yes, please chime in. I might direct a question at somebody specifically, but by all means, feel free to jump in. I want this to be an organic dialogue for all of us. So, but on that, I do want to ask, you know, Dawn, I want to ask you. You've spent much of your career in newsrooms and as in management positions across the country in those newsrooms. I wanted to start by asking, you know, what your experience was operating in those spaces before Out Sports, before you came into the work that you're currently doing now.
What a difference it was. As a matter of fact, when I finally came out and then got kicked out of ABC News, you know, I found a home at The Advocate. And I remember this conversation I had with Lucas Grinley, who was the editor-in-chief at the time. And he said, "You must have been so beaten up. You seem like a beaten puppy. And you have to understand that all the people you're working with, we're all damaged in some way. We're all victims of you know, someone who didn't respect us or give us an opportunity to really be who we are. And now you're home. Now you're home. You're in a place where you have to understand that you're not the only one who is, you know, in the position of feeling like, gee, no one understands who I am. Now I finally worked in a newsroom where everybody got that. What a change that was. Before, I'll be very honest, it was this greatest Academy Award winning act of pretending to be a man. I had to, you know, act in a way in which no one would ever figure out who I really was. And I was afraid to come out who I was, because I figured I'm going to lose my job, I'm going to lose my marriage, and I'm going to lose my home. It turned out all three of those things did turn out. but I'm so much happier being who I am that I don't really miss the Kardashian stories or the fires in the Bronx. I was at New York One as well. I started up New York One back in 1992 in the very old days. It's a whole different world though, because what newsrooms were, I don't think really exists anymore. And what I've been doing for the last 4.5 years, working from home, is what newsrooms have become. We're all sort of, learning, as David said, how to, be a video star and also to get work done in this world that we exist in. The thing that I would say most about my observations of the world I was in, there was a conference room full of white men, a token Black man, a token Asian woman, and they made the decisions. And in the newsroom were the girls and I. And I realized, I said, this is not the world I want to work up towards. I don't want to keep on going so that I can get the respect of these guys sitting around a table. And by getting that push out the door, I discovered this whole new world of LGBTQ advocacy and journalism, and working at The Advocate, LGBTQ Nation, now expanding into mainstream media with the Daily Beast and Forbes.com. I feel like I have a voice that people who aren't fans or readers of LGBT media are exposed to. And I really appreciate that. And on the flip side, I've got Outsports, which is very niche and very much about LGBT people who like sports.
Yeah, well, I was actually going to ask specifically about Outsports because I think I wanted to get some more color on your experience working on the sports beat and specifically in LGBT sports. I think there is a level of machismo culture sometimes in sports and sports coverage. And so I wanted to get a little bit more, maybe there's somebody watching who wants to go into sports, but is concerned about how they might be perceived as an LGBTQ person in a sports newsroom or on the sports news beat.
It's getting better. 2020, even though it was a shortened baseball season, was the first year in years that we didn't have a single reported homophobic slur. No baseball player said the F word or some other negative word. That's a pretty big deal. In addition to that, we've done a lot of work towards helping athletes come out. And even though there isn't any out athlete in the major pro sports, there are so many women, no major male athlete, I should say. There's so many women who are out, and women are leading the way, both on the playing field and in the locker rooms as journalists. As more and more women stake our claims, both straight and LGBT, I think that that's going to make a difference in how everyone, including men and non-binary people, are responded to and accepted. I myself, I've covered a couple of Connecticut Sun basketball games. And yeah, I've got an elbow with these old white guys who are straight, who have no idea why a trans woman is covering a basketball game. And it's because we belong everywhere.
And I also just think, like, Don, like, sports is such an important beat specifically for queer journalists, and for two reasons. I think one, because culturally sports it's not niche. Like, the way that LGBT athletes have come out and the bravery that we've seen from a lot of, I don't want to just talk about women on the U.S. Soccer team and be a cliche, but like talking about truly like how these at the college level too, athletes have pushed boundaries, I think really helps set a tone across the country in terms of showing like people who are at the top of their professions or games, et cetera, coming out. And sports journalists have really led the way, I think, in trying to cover all of the intersectional pieces of that. And I also I think sports journalism is just really powerful because I grew up on Sports Illustrated, and when you read a really powerful sports story, it touches on everything. It's not about who won the game, right? It's about all of those dynamics. And I've just been very impressed by the way that sports journalism has helped, has just really covered the complexities of LGBT people and culture in the United States and also around the world. So I think that what Outsports does, for example, is so important. But then also having LGBT journalists covering sports is also really important. Yeah.
Meredith, I agree. And we've come a long way. I am still studying at the knees of co-founders Sid Ziegler and Jim Basinski, who started Outsports, believe it or not, 21 years ago this month. And what they do is they believe in this motto, courage is contagious. There's such a myth that when an athlete comes out, they're going to be ostracized. They'll lose their sponsorships, their friends, their family. Now, does it happen? In small degrees. Overall, and studies have shown this, there is such great acceptance for when an athlete comes out, from fans to family to teammates. And I just think that there's a stigma that's attached that we are trying very hard to detach, trying to get people to understand that it's not necessarily bravery, it's about living your best. Sports is all about being your best. If you're not playing authentically, you're not being your best. And I live the same motto. I was not an athlete, but I will tell you that even at ABC, they told me they felt that I was a better employee once I was me.
Wow.
I would love to, I would love to expand on that idea of, right, you're a better reporter when you're you. And I want to, Travell, I'd love to bring you into, because I wanted to address the newsroom idea with you last, because in a way your newsroom is the most expansive in the sense that your work can be featured in many newsrooms as working in freelance. So we've talked about the importance of covering certain beats. We've talked about how much more, how the newsrooms have changed over time. What has your experience been, working with newsrooms, pitching content, pitching stories, following all of this?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll start, with just the background that, like, I got my, journalism career start in a traditional legacy, white-controlled, media entity that is the LA Times. Left the LA Times, was out for a year. So I got the experience of being in a queer newsroom. And now for the last year, I've been freelancing. And I think some of the same ideas still stand in terms of, like, the ways in which we as queer and trans people have to advocate for the types of storytelling that we want to do. Because in a mainstream newsroom, you're dealing with people feeling as if maybe a particular story isn't relevant enough, or it's not going to get the click, or it's, or you're not the person who should be doing that story. And then in some queer newsrooms, you're similarly dealing with similar motivations that impact the types of stories that sometimes get told, right? Versus those that don't. And so as a freelancer, I think what it affords me is the ability to do what I need to do to figure out which outlet I can go to tell the story that I want to tell. And so, like, I'm not necessarily dealing with some of those ramifications that you have to kind of consider when you're in a newsroom and you have, a series of editors that you have to get approval from and things like that. As a freelancer, I think it opens you up more. That being said, I hate freelancing. Give me a full-time job any day. Because the hustle of it is just a lot. But I do think that, it's freelancers, it's folks that have been working from home prior to this moment, right, that, aren't necessarily feeling the impact of this current work from home phase in the ways that others whose journalism identities often have been tethered to a newsroom.
Mm-hmm. I mean, freelancing, I'll just say, is bravery in its truest form sometimes. Like,
I've said to people that I have to work harder at chasing down paychecks than I do chasing down sources.
That part.
Yeah. I have to agree with that. But also I think Travell, you made a really great point that it does give you freedom to write about what you're passionate about. Whereas, like, in a lot of structure, there are a lot of structural things that are in newsrooms where you are often, most of what you're writing is what you're assigned, rather than having the freedom to really write about what you're passionate about, which I always thought was a little bit backwards, because when you're writing about what you're passionate about, that's when audiences come to you, because they see the passion in the words. You know, you find new audiences when they're reading things that are very clearly coming from a place of truth and real experiences, rather than, as an editor, you can spot a mile away when someone isn't really caring about what they're writing about, or they're pretending to be angry about something and some piece or whatever, whatever it is. But like I can speak without an advocate that also has a print circulation as well. This whole COVID thing has really knocked us. We're creating new systems, new strategies, new ways of working remotely, and I can't help but wonder, what is the next 3 years going to look like for queer spaces, period? Because here in West Hollywood, where I'm in, we've had, I think, 4 or 5 bars closed in the last 6 months, and people are leaving New York, they're leaving LA, they're moving to places like Tampa, like Denver and Seattle, Indianapolis. I mean, really. So it's like, so the local publications, I think, are going to have a huge boom in the next 2 years. And local queer publications, I think, are so incredibly important, because, whether you work at NBC or whether you work at a mainstream LGBTQ magazine, you depend on your local reporters to deliver stories from the ground. So I think there's going to be so many more opportunities for LGBTQ stories to come from a grassroots local level, especially after this election, when we saw this huge rainbow wave of people winning, like Richie Torres and Malcolm Kenyatta and Mondaire Jones, Chev Jones, all these people that are winning. There's a huge movement happening right now, and I think it's always going to start locally. And this queer migration that's happening, I think, is something that is going to be an incredible opportunity for journalists to latch onto, because there's going to be space for us, and I think that's something that we should all be cognizant of.
Yeah, and that is the changing newsroom, right? And yeah. It sounds, it sounds great. Like there is a more inclusive space. I just really quickly want to reference this tweet that I pulled. It was, if I can look at my notes, October 28th. And Dawn, I actually found this because you had commented on it and responded to it. Don't worry. I know Dawn's like, oh no.
That wasn't the naked one, was it?
No, it wasn't that one. I made sure not to. It was a tweet from, and again, names are very important to me, so please correct me if someone knows that I'm mispronouncing this. Jennifer Finney Boylan. Mm-hmm. In 2002, I wrote an essay on being trans for GQ magazine. They sent a brilliant photographer to photograph me. When the essay finally ran, the editors gave the photo this caption: "Dude looks like a lady." Why, yes, I am still pissed about it. Thanks for asking. And then Dawn, you responded, "There is no expiration date on apologies, GQ magazine, but even if they did, as a journalist and as a trans woman, I find that unforgivable. I am sorry. Some of us suck, not all, but enough." And I mean, I think back of that was right, like 18 years ago, right? And now here we are 18 years later, and we're talking about a more inclusive space, but we're also talking about a world where, right, I'm gonna reference another quick data point that that I found, that, Trump earned record LGBTQ support, despite his constant attacks on equality. And while Biden still led in LGBTQ support, this is all from a poll conducted by Edison Research for the National Election Pool. But I feel like we're at this point where there is more inclusive space for LGBTQ journalists, and yet we've still, at least for the last 4 years, felt like we are a part of a community that is being ostracized. And I wanted to sort of get your take as journalists, as individuals who are balancing and navigating their identities in these newsrooms and in the world where stats like that still exist. anyone can feel free to speak out on that point.
I think it's important for people to, yes, we're queer journalists. Yes, we are. But we also have our own beats too, other than just being queer, you know. Like Dawn is dominating the sports space right now. Meredith, you're doing your thing. Travell, you're doing your thing. We each have our own interests as well. And I think like that's something important for young queer journalists to know, is that you don't need to wear it on your sleeve all the time per se. You don't have to. There are times when you do, to be quite frank, because sometimes there's not going to be you're going to be the only person in the newsroom. And in that point, like unfortunately, you would have to feel a little bit incumbent upon yourself to speak out about, because there's a space missing and you're there. And it's kind of as we all have journalist hearts and spirits, and our hearts as journalists and as reporters are, you know, to get the truth out there. And I feel like I remember when I was first starting, I didn't start in a queer space. And I always felt like people had all these angles about certain stories, and in the back of my mind, I was always like, well, what about the queer angle? Like, I guess that's me. I guess I have to make sure that we include that. So, but now things have changed so much where our narrative is becoming a lot more expansive, and we don't need to just be the queer journalist. We have beats and interests just like any other journalist, but we can speak it through a queer lens. And I think, and just to go back to my other point, in the next 3 years, there's going to be such space for us to hold. And I think, you know, more so than ever, we need to be proudly LGBTQ+, proud to speak and tell these stories. But, you know, I think we don't also, but know your power is my point. Know your power, and know that you have a voice other than just speaking about LGBTQ issues. You know, I mean, I saw whenever diversity and inclusion is now, you know, part of the narrative as far as corporate policies now. I think there's a lot of conversations about, why are you only hiring people of color in these positions? Why can't other people speak to this as well? And I feel like I don't want to get there as LGBTQ people. You know, we have our own interests and topics and interests as well, and we should own that, you know, across no matter who we work for. That might have been a little bit of babbling, but I just think that you know, it's important for us to own our power and own our space, and to be unapologetically ourselves, but to also not sacrifice what we're passionate about, like our topics, our beats, our interests. We're all over the place. You know, I can't do what Travell does. Like, his scope of history and cinema and queer cinema is beyond my capacity. But that's his beat, and he's doing an incredible job. They're doing an incredible job. I'm sorry, Travell. But that is something that we all must, you know, hold on to, because that's why we enter this world, to write about what we're passionate about. So never forget that. That's my only point.
It's a great point to bring up, right? You're operating at the intersection of our identities, and that's essentially what you're advocating for here is, right? Just, we can be queer journalists and queer business journalists and queer film critics, and that's the sort of the nature of where we can operate. Did anybody else? I don't want to cut anybody off if there was.
I'll be brief, but I think intersectionality
Please.
is more than a buzzword. It's a real thing that we have to embrace. And I think that's what
Yeah.
David is talking about. Also, being trans is the 6th most interesting thing about me. You know, there are a lot of other things that I think of myself first, as a woman, as a journalist, as a mom, but we need to also not forget that there are people like Jennifer Finney Boylan, you mentioned before. I reached out to her as this closeted trans girl who was, you know, living a life that was a lie. And she responded. This famous author wrote back to me. Ina Fried came out as trans in 2007, And I reached out to her and said, I want to do what you're doing. How do I come out? And she responded. She took my phone call. It's incumbent upon us, I think, to make sure that we know that as we reach for these higher and higher levels of achievement, there are people who want to follow in our footsteps. And we need to do more than just drop breadcrumbs. We need to reach out and say, let me show you, let me help you. I mean, you can't help everybody, but I am very blessed to have several people who have found their way on this journey to help them navigate it.
Well, and I want to get to some Q&A, because I think that we can actually do exactly the charge that you're putting out there, because I'm reading some of these questions and I want to pose them to the group and see if we can provide them with some answers. So we do have a question. So what's the best way to ensure not getting misgendered in your newsroom? What do I do if my colleague acts in a transphobic manner toward me? Travell, I saw that unmute.
I mean, I think that, there are a number of issues at many newsrooms, particularly the ones that aren't, queer specific or trans specific, that make it difficult to be a trans person, a non-binary person, what have you, in those spaces. And they're big things and they're small things, right? Like making you have to, choose man or woman on the internal HR system, right? These stupid things that you don't really need to know this information. And so I think it becomes incumbent upon us as trans folks to sort of, to what Dawn said, stand in our power. I think oftentimes we feel like we can't correct people. We feel like we can't, tell you to move on. And I think in 2020, and this might be different for, if you were coming into a newsroom in the 90s, but I feel like now you should feel empowered to say something, or you should find somebody in the newsroom who can be an ally and accomplice with you and do that advocacy on your behalf if for whatever reason you're not comfortable. But I think more and more, everybody put in, a rainbow flag, some bullshit in their profiles and stuff. They post in black boxes on their timeline. Let's make them manifest, right, their commitment, their professed commitments of allyship to our communities by having them stand in place for us when we don't feel able or comfortable to correct a particular situation. That's one thing I would say.
I think that honestly leads beautifully into another question that I see here, which is how, and this is speaking to those allies that are out there, how do you advocate for queer, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color stories at a news outlet that hasn't historically centered those stories? So perhaps somewhere where, it's not necessarily an Out magazine, but one that is a little bit more heteronormative centered. And Travell, it could be for you, that could be for, maybe some of our editors who are receiving pitches, right? Like how do you weed through all the pitches that are coming through and think about balancing out, representation of voices, but also just the stories that your mediums are telling?
Well, if it's missing from the newsroom, that makes you more valuable. That's kind of your voice. That's value that you can bring. I know when I'm sifting through pitches and things, what always catches my eye is when someone says, you don't have this, you haven't covered this before. I can offer this to you. And this is the value of my work, my life. This is the value of my hours. So so I think people think in terms of clicks and people think in terms of what their inventory of editorial is. And I think you can use that to your advantage when you're pitching to these places, but again, never sacrifice your voice, your true voice in doing so.
If I can add, just from my time being at the LA Times, and you know, this is before they were apologizing for being racist and shit. You know, I think one of the things that I had to do in order to be able to tell the stories that I was most interested in doing was I had to, unfortunately, you know, improve my case for why I should be allowed to tell a particular story. And, you know, no one wants to have to prove that their perspective or vantage point is like valid or worthy. But for me, it rested in figuring out what type of data, what type of, you know, something that's tangible and real that would, you know, make that case to an editor about why I wanted to cover a particular show or a particular happening, you know, within the community. And that's one of the ways that I was able to turn some no's into yeses, is because I was able to demonstrate not only that people were interested in having that particular conversation, but that there was also an audience for it as well.
I think that the one thing that straight allies, especially in news management, can do to make things better is to hire more of us. If we have representation in the newsroom, a lot of these issues are going to go away.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Meredith. No, please.
Well, I was going to say that I think, yeah, this idea of like the audience, like Travell, you're right. Nobody wants to have to make the case for why something that they, you know, correctly know is a conversation that's happening in their particular community is worthy of being in an outlet. On the other hand, the realities are the realities. So if you're trying to make the case for an outlet that doesn't necessarily cover LGBTQ stuff, there's two things that I would pay attention to. One is what is the if it's local, like what is the population of queer people in your area? Because probably it's larger than management thinks. And then you can say, listen, like you're not covering these topic areas, but there's 10,000 people in this town who want to know what's going on in and why there are no queer bars here. And so arguing that there is an actual audience on a local level, or alternatively, arguing that there is a clear audience at a top level because Google is a great equalizer, because this topic is trending. Because look, I put this search term into Google and you've never heard of this show, but the world has, and I know that it's going to get clicks this way. Or Facebook, I know that there's this community on Facebook, on gay Twitter, on whatever, that's going to care about it, and kind of showing those communities that I think some people may not be aware of because they may not be as well versed in how the internet works, honestly, and are not cognizant about the great demand that there is out there and how you can service that. And then also what Don is saying, like sometimes for me, and like traffic is king, and the traffic cycle is brutal, and I am very cognizant of that. But also I take stories occasionally, specifically, even though I know they're not going to do well, because we're not covering them, and that's important too. And I am aware of that, and I think about that, and I think, you know, oh, there's a difference between covering the that holiday movie that's coming out with Kristen Stewart. That's gonna be popular. That's a mainstream thing. But then what's another queer movie that's coming out, or a queer TV show that maybe isn't going to be a huge hit, but that we should cover just to cover? And having people in top places who can make those calls every single time you say yes, it pushes the boundary a little bit, I think. And so that's our responsibility as gatekeepers too, those of us who are in the position to say yes, no, to sometimes just be like, yeah, I'm going to greenlight this, and even though I'm not sure about whether or not it's going to, like, from a business perspective, pay off, because every time you do, I think you make it easier for the next piece, and that's just something to think about for those who've already made it, and thinking about how we can kind of pull up people behind us.
And I just want to add that I have a very supportive boss at SB Nation, which is a part of Vox Media, which is owner of Outsports with NBC and other companies. And he keeps telling me, stop worrying so much about the traffic. You're building community. Building community is more important to us than getting good clicks. But one of the things I gave myself as a challenge when I started in February of 2019 is I want people to look at the homepage of Outsports and see themselves. I don't want it to be all white gay guys. So I want there to be a person of color. I want there to be a trans woman. I want there to be somebody non-binary. And I'm in charge of making sure that readers see that. And it may be that there are some established readers from our 2 decades in the business that aren't happy about that. I'm trying to build a bigger barn for everyone, not just appeal to a certain clientele. And I hope that everybody can do that, have that opportunity to build community and not worry so much about traffic. But I guess that's how we get paid, right?
Well, I think about it, and I'll just quickly chime in with right. I think my experience here at CNBC has very much been that, right? If there's a story that crosses my radar that's LGBTQ centered, the first question I still ask myself, because I know what that pitch process is going to be like, what's the money impact? Where's the money in this story? Because that's what's going to really market that story to an editor. And I've had experiences with that where I've thought first, like I've asked the money question, and I know that it's one that impacts the LGBTQ community and the spending dollars that the LGBTQ community contributes to GDP every single year. And I've filled myself with those stats, but like that is where, like you said, our interests marry our identities, and that produces our work. And I think that's so true. What we're all talking about here. I think we've actually honestly answered some of these questions just in passing, right? We've talked about, do you ever worry about being tokenized in the newsroom? Is there ever a story you wanted to elevate, but institutional organizations or pressure from them prevented you? We covered a little bit of that. One I do want to touch on, and it's really because I think that this is at the core of why we're here, and then we'll wrap things up after answering this, but is to address the questions that are coming from young aspiring journalists who may find themselves at NYU. While newsrooms are changing, how can a young queer BIPOC writer work past the concern that their work won't be respected or received with value? And I'm going to just couple that quickly with another question, which is fairly similar. I'm fairly sure I'm non-binary, but I have this fear that people won't take me seriously or will impact my career. How do I grow in my confidence in asserting my identity? So just the idea of embracing your identity and this sort of like fear, right, that your work may not be respected if you embrace your identity and present it forward as part of your work.
I'll jump in and say that I think, no matter what, letter in the, alphabet soup you find a home in, I think it's important that you kind of find your confidence and your security in your identity, regardless of the work that you're doing. I would never want someone to feel as if, their identity is somehow like less valid or less valuable because of the ways in which their work is or is not received, is or is not paid for, although you should be paid, how much it is paid, you get paid to do it. But ultimately, I think it comes down to the work. I'm going to sound a little cocky here, but, I think one of the reasons why I was successful after being laid off this past year is because people knew the work. People knew that I turned in good copy. They knew that I could get a cute little interview together. They knew that I could bring and would bring something different than literally anyone else who's out here doing it. And that uniqueness, that specificity, and that I think that confidence in my voice, which is connected to my identity as a Black, non-binary person with trans experience, but also is independent of that, I think really served me and continues to service me in my career.
Yeah, so we have 5 minutes left. I'm gonna.
David, did you want to add? I think David wanted to add something.
Were you?
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to just echo what Travell was saying. I mean, authenticity, people are attracted to that. The universe rewards you when you're authentic to who you are. And because your work is a reflection of that. It always is a reflection of that. And, when you're authentic and genuinely, yourself. And look, like, life is crazy, you know, especially this industry. When you start, sometimes you feel like, oh, is this a space for me? Maybe I'll give this a shot. It's not really working. I'll try this beat here a little bit more. Like, who am I? What am I? What do I have to offer? What is my voice? All these questions you sort of like figure out a little bit, and eventually you always will find that the most authentic voice, the most authentic you, is always going to be the best, because that's where people it's when it's hard. I had a teacher once that told me, if it's hard to write, it's hard to read. And I don't really know. Yeah, sometimes most of the time I agree with that, but I'm always, you know, I always overthink whenever I'm writing. But I think what she meant was that, you know, there's all this heady stuff whenever you're trying to figure out your writing voice and what sort of direction you want to go in your career path or whatever. But at the end of the day, when you weed out the voices and you find your own path, that's when things really start to happen and shape up. And so just listen, just listen to your voice, and you'll eventually people find you. That's how the universe rewards you, is that people find you when you're authentic.
I remember when I was struggling about coming out, someone told me that self-confidence is 90% of people buying into your identity. In other words, they'll believe you if you believe you. And I know that's hard, but what I did was I reached out. I found mentors. I found other people who did what I want to do. And I recommended that second question person that finding a non-binary friend, finding people of color, if that's your identity, who have traveled the road. Reach out.
And also, just to be corporate for a second, like, if you have good work and then you're also non-binary, that's great. All of these corporations have diversity initiatives right now, truly. So you should be thinking, this is amazing for me. I've got two things, but it starts with the work, right? So if you have strong clips, that is the first thing. If you're a young journalist right now, you have to be focusing on your craft. Be true to yourself and be confident. And everything that we're talking about is how to make sure that you are authentic and all the benefits of that. But if you have a strong clip, and then you can go into them and you can say, hi, like, my writing is amazing, this X, X, and X. And also, oh, by the way, I'm offering something that you should want for so many reasons. And some of them are cynical and some of them are not. And you should use all of those to try and get a job. And you know, at some places, at conservative media, in some places, maybe that's not going to be, it hasn't reached that yet. But at a lot of media organizations right now, there's a ginormous push for people who are not straight, cis, white people. And you should absolutely be using that if you're thinking about how to get a job right now.
Amen.
I love that. I love the oh, by the way. That needs to be like that needs to be embroidered on throw pillow for me. Oh, by the way. But so we have a minute left, just under a minute left. Those who are watching, grab a pen, grab your phone to start typing. What I want to do to close out quickly, we may go a minute or two over, is if we can go around and toss out some names of individuals, LGBTQ journalists who are operating in the space, outlets that people who are watching should look to, so that they could do exactly what you called for, Dawn, right? Find advocates who are doing what they want to be doing, or finding resources. So Dawn, if you want to start.
Oh, I feel bad. I'm going to use up all the time. Katie Barnes is at Katie_Barnes3 at ESPN. Kate Sozin, they are at Shoe Leather Kate. Oh, sorry. And Katie Barnes is they, them also. Kate Sozin is at Shoe Leather Kate. Raquel Willis. Oh my God, I love Raquel. At Raquel Willis. Nico Lang has given up Twitter for right now, and he's got someone running Twitter for him, but is at Nico_Lang. My favorite writer is at Literelli, LITERELLY. Caitlin Burns at Transcribe. I think probably the most prominent trans writer there is right now. And my podcast partner, Carly Webb, is at Chardonnay M. And she is my podcast partner and a woman of color and a great writer. And I'll stop.
And they can reach out to you directly for more names, I'm sure.
Yes. At Life After Dawn.
Yes. Meredith, do you have any that you can?
Yeah, well, Don just like went through and took everybody's name. No, that's okay. There are so many. I just want to say there's so many great journalists, LGBT journalists, and sometimes I think they some of them go under the radar because they're not always covering LGBTQ issues. And so one person who does and also doesn't is Ariel Ross. I probably am pronouncing her name wrong. Ariel is one of incredibly talented journalists who works at Vox right now and covers science and the environment, but also often through an LGBTQ lens. And if you don't know how that can work, you need to check out their work, because this is an example of how sometimes beats that might seem divorced from the queer culture, et cetera, are absolutely not. I love Ariel. And then also Trish Bendix, who's a fabulously talented writer who she writes for me a lot. And she has been around for so long and she knows so much. She's got a lot of institutional knowledge. And she's also incredibly versatile, which is something that is another really good thing for freelancers. I can go to her. I trust her completely on so many topics, culture, also politics or whatever. And that's a really important skill to have.
Thank you, Meredith. David?
So I don't have their handles, but I do have their names. I mean, Michelle Garcia at NBC Black is incredible. Tracy E. Gilchrist, who is the editor-in-chief of The Advocate magazine, is incredible. Michael Street, our digital director, is very engaged on Twitter and on social media, and he's incredible at inciting conversations. And also besides just the journalists, also Neil Broverman, of course, at Advocate, and Diane Anderson Minshall. There's also incredible activists who are using their work to do what journalists do. But people like Raquel Willis, who's an incredible journalist, but also Elle Hearn, and also Kyan Durashow, who is an incredible activist in Queens, New York. And also follow all these new amazing politicians like Richie Torres and Mondaire Jones and Tiffany Caban and Malcolm Kenyatta, Chev Jones. Also Mama Joe in Chicago and Lucy Stoll in Chicago are incredible. And they basically are inciting a reckoning in Chicago's Boys Town right now. And they are just incredible activists. And, there's a lot of people, but those are the people I have.
Yeah. All right, Travell, I've left it you to round us off.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say many of the names that they already said, but I'll add, for the broadcast folks that are out there, I will add Fannie Redwood. She is my co-chair of NABJ's LGBTQ task force, and she's great, at Fannie Redwood, FEMI. And then I'll lift up two music journalists that I look up to. Garrick Kennedy, Gerrick. He wrote a book on NWA and is currently writing a book on Whitney Houston. Used to be at the LA Times with me. And then last but not least, I'll say Taylor Crumpton, TaylorCrumpton. She's doing some really fabulous work in the music, hip hop journalism space as well.
Amazing. I'm genuinely going to do this. I'm going to go back, rewatch, put together a comprehensive list of everyone that was mentioned. And I'll be sure to circulate that and also get it to NYU. So hopefully they can do something with that information as well. I think it's so fantastic to have all of you with us tonight. It's so fantastic. I mean, right there, look, you named off a community of journalists who could be on this panel right now. And so we appreciate, I appreciate, NYU appreciates you taking the time to be with us to speak, on the topic of queer journalists navigating the newsroom. So thank you all. Thank you everyone who joined us tonight. Again, we appreciate it. And I'm gonna borrow a line from Travell now and say we're gonna go forward and, as I quote, slay on. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you, everyone. Great talking to y'all.
Yes.
And Travell, I'm so glad you mentioned Femi. I love Femi. Oh my gosh. Thank you. All right, take care, guys.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care, everybody.